What's up, guys? Welcome back to the LTL Podcast. I'm here with Tim.
Your host with not really the most.
And this week's episode, we're just going to be doing our little ode to our farewell to the Tweener teams, the teams that have since last week been eliminated. And essentially that boils down to the New York Rangers, the Dallas Stars. Technically speaking, the Stars are still in it, but I think if the Predators get like 2 or 3 points, then the Stars are out of it. So there's a definite chance that the Stars could come back. There's always a chance, but
We've been wrong before. But
let me pull up the standings here because they're down by 3 points, but they have a game in hand. The Stars can reach, if they get 8 points, 64 points. But I think they play each other at some point. There's a clinching scenario for the Predators tonight. I know that. So we'll talk about the Stars. We'll talk about the Rangers. And we'll talk about the Arizona Coyotes. And I guess we'll start in, the hotbed of the hockey universe right now. Manhattan, New York Rangers, Jeff Gorton, and John Davidson were fired today. The story goes that they were trying to distance themselves from the post that the New York Rangers made on their social media account the other day, and then today they were actually officially let go. Goodbye, out the door. Forget about it. I'm walking in, the whole 9 yards. So the club said it was unrelated. They said that they were unhappy with the way that the team performed this year. And, the Rangers definitely did underperform a lot of people's expectations, mine included. I picked them to finish second in the division, but I guess before we really get into what happened this year and why the team fell apart, as a Rangers fan, is this from the team, or do you think that this is the Rangers organization saying, look, if you're not going to stand with us and protect our players, then you're out the door?
I 100% think it's that. That statement doesn't – the statement that they released about it doesn't sit well with me that it was not related. Because if you're disappointed with the team in the season, you fire the coach. You don't fire your GM and your president. And John Davidson is very well respected and liked around the league. So it's kind of a little, I don't want to say it's out of pocket, but it's a little out of pocket for them to just fire him on the whim like that. But I don't disagree with it really, honestly, though. I think at a certain point you need to argue with the people who run the league when you look around the league, especially this season with some of the hits that have been thrown and some of the questionable fines and not suspensions that haven't been handed out. You have to look around the league, and if your GM and your president aren't going to stand with you as an organization when you feel you're right, and when objectively they really weren't that wrong in saying what they said. So I'm not really that surprised. But on the same topic, I really wish that the Rangers would stop trying to be the Yankees, and I think that's kind of what this was. They're not the clean... They never were the clean-cut, super respectful, nice boys in the league. That's not what they were. Pretty much ever. They were always well respected because of the organization being the top original six, but these weren't guys who were going and pussyfooting around out there. We had Brendan Shanahan on the team, who is, let's be honest, one of the biggest goons in history. I don't, and I think that's kind of what maybe came down to the line of it, is that, but it's hard to say though, I don't know.
I don't have an issue with the firings being for either reason. In my heart of hearts, if you ask me what I thought, you can't have a general manager and a president who's not going to stand with the team. You just can't. It's not going to function. Not to mention that's going to be a toxic relationship with the players. Because think about it, if they didn't fire those two, and then word later got out that they distanced themselves from that statement, if you're Artemi Panarin, how do you feel about that?
I don't understand. If I was Artemi Panarin and that happened to me, I understand the league and the rationale of the league and the respect that the players have for the man at the top, but at a certain point, I don't know how the players union didn't even try and step in on this about the safety aspect.
Well,
and like the fact that no one even on the cap. So I know that the Capitals are a bunch of scumbags in their organization, and I know why they didn't address it. But the fact that they didn't address it is a very bad look for their team to everyone else, in my opinion. You can't go out and, because everyone around the league is saying that this was belligerently bad, it was vicious, it was unnecessary, out of pocket, and that he should have been suspended, and that it wasn't fairly due.
Anybody with half a brain cell, anyway.
Like, so
shout out to Ryan Whitney.
I don't know if there's some miscue that the Capitals aren't picking up on, but they should really understand what happened and maybe put a statement out saying something. But they have to stick by their player, so I understand why they're handcuffed. But
I mean, here's the thing, right? So your question about the players union, why they didn't say anything, is because they're kind of the reason why guys like Wilson can do what they do, because they negotiated the CBA to be written that way. And there's a reason that $5,000 is the max fine. That's because the players union wanted it to do that. So the players union are partially at fault here, in my opinion.
The $5,000 fine, I understand. Like, I understand that, like, they want to get the players, like, the least amount of in trouble that they can do. Like, that's the job of a union, obviously. It's what they're kind of built on. So
which is kind of a crock of shit.
It's a bit of a crock of shit, but I don't understand how players around the league can't, like, stand up. The fact that I really wish there was some large movement of people around the league calling out George Parros for this, or even just calling out Tom Wilson for this. Like, I haven't seen enough people in the NHL who play talking about this, because what they're not talking about is, what if this was your teammate? What if this was your superstar? What if they did this to Connor McDavid? Darnell Nurse would have went off the wall.
You know, the thing is, you know...
And also, just one more thing. We have a replay up right the second of what just happened. I understand the ref's job. I understand their position. But when you see him slamming him into the ice with the both linesmen already tangled up, you have a job as an official on the ice for the safety of the players.
Well, I think that the referees in question from last night, first of all, I don't know why he wasn't given a game misconduct instead of just a 10-minute misconduct. He should have been thrown out of the game, first of all. And the Department of Player Safety, you know, I've seen a lot of people. It's funny because you said, like, players aren't calling him out for it. And that's, you know, I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised.
They have the biggest voice in all of this, really. Like, they don't. I'm not sure if they don't I really do understand that, like, the NHL is this respected structural hierarchy, almost like a feudal system in Japan, where, like, the guy on the top is without question on top and you don't question him. But at a certain point as a player, where do you think of your safety? I wouldn't feel comfortable skating against guys like him. And what's worse than anything is that said to me that anything goes up to that point.
Well, that's what what's his face? That's what John Scott, he put out a statement saying that the next time he's in a scrum, if he was still in the league, the next time he's in a scrum, he'd just be, like, bodying everyone, because why wouldn't you? And I think that, you know, we've seen incidents like this occur before. So this goes back a long time. You know, New York Islanders fans know all about this. The fight night against the Pittsburgh Penguins was the result of Max Talbot not being suspended for his cheap shot on Blake Como, and the Pittsburgh Penguins, you know, hubris and all that situation. And obviously, look, the Rangers are not built the same way that New York Islanders team was, but if anything happens tonight, which I anticipate things will be happening tonight, it's 100% any blood that's shed is on the back of the National Hockey League at this point, because they blew it, and the Department of Player Safety blew it. Tom Wilson is a repeat offender. He's been, I think, suspended 7 times and fined twice. He basically threw them a meatball, like a 80-mile-an-hour fastball down the middle, like right at belt
Not even
level.
80, like a 75 mile an hour. Like it was a middle school fastball.
The Department of Player Safety whiffed. I mean, there's absolutely no question about it. And I think that what this says to me is George Parros, he can't do his job. He needs to be relieved immediately. Bill Daly also needs to be relieved immediately. And, it's funny because, like you said, not a lot of players are calling him out, but a lot of hockey media has been calling out.
The whole media is speaking about it, but I would love to, we need to see more players because they're the ones who are really affected by this whole thing.
The issue is you're probably not going to see that because the players don't want to go against the union, and the union is the reason why he wasn't suspended in the first place. Because the way they wrote the CBA, and this is why I think the NHLPA has a very, a lot of the blood in the situation is on their hands, because the way they wrote the CBA was to minimize player punishment, when in reality it should be to hold people accountable, because that's what the Department of Player Safety is supposed to do.
Completely agree. They are at indirect fault, they're not like the direct fault for the situation right this minute in our hands, because there's a person who was supposed to be giving judgment calls on what was done, and he didn't do his job.
And the other issue is, we heard earlier in the year that on the Brandon Carlo hit that Wilson was suspended for, apparently Gary Bettman was the one that had to step in and tell Parros to suspend Wilson because Parros didn't want to do it. So clearly, this guy can't do his job.
I don't know if he's betting on Washington or something.
He needs to be removed. I mean, I love George Parros as a player, but he cannot do his job. There's very clearly an issue with him and being in this position.
And he's clearly
he's incompetent. He can't do it. He's incompetent.
I honestly think that he just doesn't want to suspend superstars.
He's incompetent.
We didn't see who was it in that Boston game that threw that hit that we talked about.
I don't remember. I know what hit you're talking about, when he came flying across the ice in a clear charge.
Nothing even happened with that hit.
I mean, he didn't suspend McDavid for elbowing him.
He didn't suspend McDavid for elbowing him. I don't know if anyone saw last night, but Sidney Crosby was slamming someone's head into the ice last night with the same way that Tom Wilson did.
But Gostisbehere got suspended instead, so it's like...
But for some reason, Gostisbehere, the no-name, essentially, compared to everyone else, compared to Tom Wilson, Connor McDavid, and Sidney Crosby, is a no-one, so he got suspended 2 games.
It's just not a good look. It's not a good look for... And I mean, I don't want to go too much into detail just because if you guys are curious, I did put out a mini pod on my thoughts on everything. But I will just reiterate and say it's not a good look for anybody involved. It's a really bad look for the Capitals. It's a bad look for the Department of Player Safety. It's a bad look for the league. And it's a bad look for a lot of hockey media who's trying to defend him. And I'm going to call them out again. Ray Whitney and Bissonnette on Spit and Chicklets. Ryan Whitney, sorry. You guys got to be better because, unfortunately, and I hate that this is a reality, but you're kind of a face of our sport, and for you meatheads to be posting the stuff that you're posting is not okay.
So, my last thoughts on this whole thing, involving the Tom Wilson aspect of it, not the Rangers and their, organization, is... You put it back even 15 years, I have no problem with what he did. Because 15 years ago, someone would have taken their stick and smashed it over his back. You would have had 2 or 3 of them, and you would have had the goalie fly down the ice. Even 15 years ago, we're talking about. Even in the early 2000s. If you did that while Cronwall was on the ice, he would have killed everyone on your team. He literally would have assassinated every single person, including the goalie. And... Then everyone would have went away. They would have got their penalties, and the game would have been over, and no one would have cared. But the reality is, we play in a entertainment league at this point. We don't want people getting hurt. We don't need guys slamming people's face into the ice so they can't play. We play in a league where we want to see our guys play 82 games a season. They're not meant to play 45. Because someone goes and boards them face first into the boards. And if you want that to be the way it goes, and if you want to allow that, then you need to allow for the fighting and the repercussions on the ice. When you don't allow for people to deal with it on the ice like they should, then nothing will happen. And I think this is back to the Rangers organization. I wish the Rangers weren't such Yankees in terms of the baseball, and that they weren't trying to be so clean cut and professional all the time. And I really wish that they would have that game. But I guarantee you, what Quinn said when they went in the locker room was, don't go out there, don't do anything, let the league handle this. And that's not the way it should have been done, because it's clear that the league wasn't going to handle it.
So I guess we could pivot the conversation to the Rangers missing the playoffs and possibly reasons why. And, I mean, it's not a secret around the league that this is not a really a traditionally tough team. You don't really have many guys that are fighters or scrappers. And, you know, a lot of teams around the league, I won't say a lot, but a couple of teams around the league are kind of going, like, trying that experiment. But, you know, we saw it last year with the Leafs having basically 4 scoring lines, and then this year they end up getting some tougher players. Like, do you think that maybe that kind of lack of edge? I mean, they have guys like Brendan Smith who will throw some hits. They have guys like Ryan Lindgren, who's a tough player in that he's made out of steel.
Right off the face-off. Sorry to cut you off, but we had a line brawl in the Rangers game right off the face-off that was on in the background.
Yeah.
And but what was interesting was the Capitals player dropped his gloves first.
Yeah, but it's kind of funny because, like, none of these guys are Tom Wilson, so...
Yeah. Why are they not even paying attention to the fights, the refs?
That was very interesting. But, yeah, no, that it's interesting because, you know, it's not over. This is very clearly that's not going to be the last fight of the night for sure, but... you know, I was just saying, you know, do you think that maybe that lack of grit really is kind of like part of, not the entirety, but like maybe part of what hurt the Rangers this year? Maybe a lack of toughness, a lack of...
For the past 20 years, I would say, that has been the Rangers' problem. Even when you had guys like Dan Girardi, Ryan McDonough, Mark Stahl on the team, your only hitting defenseman was, or the only hitting player on that team still was Chris Tanev.
Or Ryan Callahan.
And Callahan, little animal, furious little fuck, but not, you need someone who can go out there and, because you can't play the game and worry that your superstars are going to get T-boned, and because you can check in the NHL. You can get away with some questionably dirty hits often. So you can't go out there with the thought that, oh, they're just going to hit Connor McDavid, they're just going to beat him around, and we're not going to do anything about it.
I mean, we saw that be an issue for the Leafs last year in the playoffs, and we've even seen it this year a couple times where Austin Matthews has basically gotten run. You know, he's gotten checked in the head a couple times, and essentially nobody on the Leafs did anything. And it just kind of is very questionable because it's one of those situations where even if you don't load up on fighters, like, I'm going to talk about the Islanders because that's a team that I know.
No,
best.
you need size. Even if, okay, 2 more fights.
There's Wilson. He's getting into a scrap with who? Is that Brendan Smith? Yeah, that's Brendan Smith.
The only one who would probably willing to fight him.
You know, I still have no respect for Tom Wilson, though. Like, I have literally less than zero.
To be honest, if
for him.
I was any of the Rangers on this team on the ice right now, I would third man in him.
I mean, yeah, like, you might as
I would
well.
literally third man in and just take him down and beat him, because Brendan Smith is kind of getting his ass kicked right now, honestly.
I just, like, you know what it is? I don't respect Wilson for dropping the gloves here because he shouldn't. This should never have even happened in the first place, and it's just a joke. Like, he's just a joke. He's a fool. He's a garbage hockey player, and I have no respect for him. But you know, if we talk about like the Islanders, like obviously I know the Islanders best, right? So even a guy like Anders Lee, who's like not a fighter, you know, like, he'll still drop the gloves when he sees a bad hit. Or even a guy like Josh Bailey, who's like small and scrawny, like, he'll still drop the gloves.
I don't even think you need to worry about fighting, but you need to You can't go out there and not pose the threat that if they hit your superstar, that you're not going to hit theirs. You can't. You need to be able to pose the threat that if you make this a game of hitting and you essentially lose the skill aspect of it and you just start running around hitting people, you need to be able to combat that to hit their players back. Because if you're not, you're just, like I said, what we saw with Boston Matthews, you're gonna get run. Same thing with when Ovechkin dropped Svechnikov. Hello, where was the team?
Like, nobody did anything. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's I think every team needs, you don't necessarily need a guy that's going to go out there and be like, a George LaRock or, ironically enough, like a George Parros, right? Like, you don't need that guy who's only out there just to fight people. But I think it's important to have that threat, because even a guy like, you look at the Islanders, like the whole fourth line, Martin, Clutterbuck, Zizekas, and you look at the defense like Pulak, Pelech, these hard-hitting, tough-checking guys. And then, like I said, even a threat of, like, if you run Matt Barzal, Anders Lee's not a fighter. He's probably not going to piece you up, but he's going to come over there and he's going to chuck knucks with you.
Not
and,
even
like,
that.
You need that threat of, like, listen, I'm going to hold you accountable because you're not going to do this to my team.
Rangers play the Islanders. Let's say Chris Kreider stupidly, because he's stupid. I'm not even saying he intended to do it. Let's say he accidentally boards someone on the Rangers. Let's say he accidentally boards Barzal. Panarin's going to have his head up the rest of the game because Anders Lee, as a captain and as a player, is going to go for him and Kreider. You can't be... And I don't want to make it because he's a superstar, but the fact of the matter is he did beat up a superstar. And you need to be able to defend your superstars.
So, besides the maybe potential lack of grit on the team, like, what else do you think really was kind of an issue with the Rangers this year?
I think every issue stems off that, though, because I have issues with Keandre Miller because he's not physical and he tried to use his stick too much. And he played really well in the beginning of the season. He was on the money. His stick was on a dime. And then halfway through the season, he lost it, and he's kind of looked shitty ever since. He's giving up turnovers. He's losing battles. Same thing. I would love to... Adam Fox, I can't really talk bad about, but the guy drops muffins, and he tries to use his stick to get out of the situation when I would love to see him tie them up instead. I would love to see the Rangers go into the corners and boards more just to battle. They're trying to do a lot of stick work, and it's not working. They have the skill to do the stick work, but they don't have the size to because Ovechkin can stick lift anyone in the league. He's a bull. He's not like 7 foot, but absolute beast.
So, do you think that, that's a roster thing? Do you think you guys need to maybe, like, shed some of the third or fourth line scorers and pick up some more bigger players, or?
I don't know, because they're a bunch of kids who I don't know if they're going to get bigger and work into their size or not. Like, Lafreniere and Kakko both Lafreniere needs to use his size. It's a fact. He just needs to use his size, and he needs to use his speed along with his size. He hasn't really come into it yet. Kakko, I just would like to see him get more into the game. But every issue that I have with the Rangers comes down to either grit or fire. They lack fire under them, and they have no grit.
The problem is, even if a guy like Laff, who's a stocky kid, he's a big guy, even if he gets bigger, he's probably not going to be using his size in a traditional checking role because he's a skill player. I'm more asking, like, do the Rangers maybe need a fourth line, like a Martin Zizekas Clutterbuck line, just to kind of balance out the roster a little bit?
100%. They need a good third line center who's a little bigger.
So
I would love to see them get maybe some power in down that center position.
He's not like he's not playing anymore, but like maybe like a Mike Richards kind of guy. Even though Richards was smaller, like he played kind of like in that way.
But the Rangers just need a captain more than anything.
Well, and then my other question, keeping on like the whole train of thought with the leadership, is how long does David Quinn, like, what's his leash like at this point? Is it if they start next season bad, he's already going to be out. Like, where's the leash with Coach Quinn right now?
Considering they fired Parros and Gordon on a dime. Davidson, my mistake.
We want them to fire Parros.
Yeah, I'm going to say, considering they fired Davidson and Gordon on a dime, I would say his window could be as quick as the off season, but it could also be as long as all of next year, because clearly there's some allegiance to him if he wasn't fired in this whole spew of firing, because 3 games left in the season, you already fired your GM and your president.
I mean, I would think that the coach would be on the chopping block if the reason given was that the team was underperforming, because you can't, the old saying is you can't fire a team, you can fire a coach.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be interesting, especially because you have to think about it. Chris Drury is the new acting president of the New York Rangers. And traditionally speaking, inherited coaches don't last very long. A lot of times coaches that are inherited from the previous regime, unless they're like a super successful franchise at that point, generally speaking, GMs like to have their own guys behind the bench. So that might also kind of be a factor here. And I don't know. I mean, I just think like there's better options. There's a lot of roster issues that I have with the Rangers, but I think that you can point to coaching as a big part of the reason why this team struggled so much this year, because a lot of the decisions that Quinn made were questionable. I mean, if you want to just talk recent history, the last 2 games against the Islanders, those 2 games prior to... Yeah, I know. There's like 8 guys in the box right now.
This is a joke. I would love to see them run out of guys.
I mean, at the end of the Islanders fight night, there was 4 guys on the bench. They only had 4 guys left to play on the bench, so everyone else got thrown out.
Here we go. This is an awesome Rangers game. To anyone who... You should honestly go watch it just because of all the fights. You just need to watch the first period. There's already been 7 fights.
See, it's interesting because a lot... Like, these are obviously, like, very staged fights. Like, these are fights that were, like, agreed to. I'm curious to see, like, as the game wears on.
Well, they jumped Tom Wilson. No. Rooney absolutely jumped Tom Wilson.
I'm saying I'm interested to see, like, as the game goes on, because, like, these are fights, like, off the face-off. A lot of these
early fights later in the game. Let's see if this grit keeps up. But let's move on to a different team. We've been on the Rangers for too long. Let's just completely change topics. I don't mean to cut you off, but like we've been on this way too long.
I mean, it's an interesting team because there's a lot of stuff going on with them, and they're a team I think that's going to be worth watching in the off season.
By the way, I don't mean to cut you off, but Strome actually did piece him up. And that's crazy. But
So, I guess the next team that we can get into here is, I guess we'll talk about the Coyotes because I don't think there's as much there as there is with other teams. Is it an issue of the Coyotes team being questionable? Was it an issue of them just having to deal with some really good teams in their division? Because they are going to be going... The thing is, the Coyotes have to realize next season they're going to be back in the Central Division. So it's not going to get any easier for them next year.
No. The competition arguably gets harder.
So, I mean, what went wrong? Like, what happened to them this year?
Did anything really go wrong, or are they just actually just that bad?
I can't tell because last year...
I think that they've been a dumpster fire since their not the most recent playoff run. Do you remember their playoff run before that they had? The deep one where they went to like the second round?
I think I think they only ever made it to the second round, but there was one year where they knocked off the Blackhawks. I know that. Because last year it's odd because last year the team really was really good for the most part up until it, like when they traded for Taylor Hall, like, you know, the wheels kind of fell off the wagon for some reason. Like they just started dropping games left, right, and center. Like they were in the mix to win that Pacific Division for a long time.
Phil Kessel was playing amazing.
It's just odd. Like, I look at, and I mean, we've talked at length about the fact that the roster is weird. It's this weird mix of like speed and youth, but also like these slow players that can't keep up anymore. I mean, I think the goaltending is good. I think Ronta and Kemper are a solid pair. They just can't stay healthy to save their life. And I don't know. It's just a very...
The problem with that organization is they have no place to start. Where do you start? Goaltending, defense, forwards. They need to pick a position to start at, and I would honestly say they should probably start at goaltending, because if you have a good goalie, and honestly, for all intents and purposes, ignoring the players and speaking just from a franchise perspective, you really don't care if you burn a goalie out, you get the last maybe 2-3 years out of his career, when your youth on the team finally caught up and you actually get some competitive seasons, and then you can just replace the goalie. Not that a goalie is easy to replace, but he's a lot easier to replace than a whole lineup. Or he's an easier place to start than a lineup.
I mean, the question is, well, what are you building for? Do you think that they should, like, are you saying that they should retool, go on for a full-on rebuild? Like, what do you think?
No, they should probably rebuild. They need to rebuild, because, like I said, they have no grounds to start. And I don't necessarily think that in 5, 6, 7 years, they could be a young, not competitive, but they could be a young kind of, maybe, who's a young team they could be, not the Florida Panthers or they could be a Minnesota Wild, as they are right now, in like 8 years.
I mean, I just think that them going back to the Central Division it's going to be difficult for them, because, I mean, let's be honest here, the Pacific is just going to be horrendous next year. I mean, unless the Seattle Kraken or the Vegas Golden Knights 2.0, that division is going to be horrendous. So the fact that they're leaving that division for the Central is tough, because I think the Blues are going to be better than they were next year. I mean, obviously, you still have the Colorado Avalanche. Maybe the Dallas Stars get their act together. If the Blackhawks have Taves back, or even if they don't have Jonathan Taves, even if they just have Kirby Dach for a full season next year, like, they look like they're going to be okay. So I just don't see the pieces on this roster coming together in a window that's going to work, because a lot of their better pieces, like guys like Phil Kessel, or I think Derek Brassard is back on that team now.
He is.
You know, Ekman Larson. Like, by the time that this roster is ready to compete, those guys are going to already be like 35, 36 years old.
Stepan's already like 32 or 3, I think.
Yeah, so it's like by the time this team is ready to go, your window's going to be 2 years long. Is that even really worth it? And then you're going to be in a weird spot where you have guys like, you're going to have like a 26 to 27-year-old Clayton Keller and like a 27-year-old like Jacob Chikrin, but now you have to wait another 5 years. Like,
that's why I think that they should essentially just start the rebuild. I don't
just like completely tear it down. Just start like right from the beginning again. Just because essentially what they're trying to do right now is they're trying to put a jigsaw puzzle together but they don't have all the pieces. So they're taking pieces from other jigsaws and like trying to like fit them in.
Exactly, and it's
so like instead of having like a sunflower, you have like a sunflower, but the middle is like some dude's face, and it's like
they're trying to put like a bike together, but they have a
car
like
together, motorcycle parts, but also like speedboat parts. So it's like
they're trying to put a car together, but they have everything but car parts.
So it's just, you know, I think that they should just bite the bullet, which kind of sucks because, like, they do have some nice young talent. Like, Connor Garland, I think, is a good player. Obviously, Clayton Keller, Jacob Chikrin. But it's just not all going to come together in a way that's going to be homogenous in time for the team to compete, I don't think. So, I mean, why they missed the playoffs this year, they couldn't score. I mean, they just had a lot of scoring issues. And I think, honestly, they were just outclassed. The teams in that division were just better than them.
But with the season that the Blues are having, they should have been in the race.
Well, it's crazy because they were in the race for a long time. only because the Blues were just like so bad for some reason.
That's what I'm saying. I think they should have made it because of how bad the Blues played throughout the season. Like, they should have seized the opportunity, but they flopped it instead.
It's definitely interesting as far as that team goes. I mean, if I was them, I would try to convince the Kraken to take one of their bad contracts and then just kind of tear it down this offseason. I mean, we heard all the rumors about Ekman Larson. Like, I don't know, like eight guys just came out of the box.
It's been over 5 minutes since the whistle. And
so like literally 7 guys just came out of each
fight
team's
from
box.
from like after the first face-off on just came out of the box. It was literally 6 guys. It was awesome.
So it's definitely going to be hard for the Yotes, and it's disappointing because 2 years ago I was really excited about this team. I was like, oh, you know, they look like they're on the rise. They got all these new players, and then it just kind of fell apart. I mean, I think that teams are underestimating how important it is to build from within. I mean, when you look at a team like, again, I hate to keep bringing them up, but the New York Islanders, right? Like, when you think of the core of that team, like 90% of the core of the team was a draft pick. You know, the only players right now that I would consider core players that came from outside the organization is Nick Leddy, who came from Chicago. Varlamov obviously came by way of the Colorado Avalanche. But Barzal, or Eberle, obviously came from the Oilers, but Barzal, Lee, Bailey, Beauvillier, Wallstrom, Pelech, Pulak, Mayfield, Sorokin, all draft picks, all came from within. Brock Nelson came from within. I just think that teams severely underestimate that. They're like, yeah, we'll get a couple good draft picks, and then we'll kind of just fill in the gaps from outside the organization. And it's like, look, you need to have that homogenous, like, team. You can't just have, and I think this was also what hurt the Wild for so long, because the Wild had this homogenous team, and then they tried to, they were essentially like if they were building Frankenstein's monster, they had everything, and then the head and the heart came from like 2 different places, and so their whole body like fell apart, and they're like, what happened? It's like, well, because you had a team, and then you tried to insert Parise and Suter onto it, and Devin Dubnyk, and it just like you basically like most of your Frankenstein's monster here is it just doesn't work.
You had like one decent playoff run, and it wasn't even decent. Got past the first round a couple times, but like
it's kind of like they had an Xbox and then they put like a bunch of PS4 stuff in it, and they're like, why doesn't it work? It's like, well, like, I mean,
well, no, they were just playing with dead batteries, so they kept turning it on and being like, all right, I got 30 seconds.
I mean, do you agree? Do you think that like teams are underestimating how important it is to be like build from within the organization?
No, I actually agree with you to a very large extent, because you can't build a team and presume somewhere down the line you're going to get the missing piece, because you get what like happened to, let's say, the Blues, who, when it came down to it, they said, oh, we'll replace Pietrangelo in a few years, like, it's not a big deal, we'll just, you know, work it out. And then Torrey Krug was the best option, and he, while playing really well, Torrey Krug is good.
He's just not Pietrangelo.
He's not Pietrangelo. He doesn't do the defensive job that Pietrangelo did. So you can't build these teams with these prefaces that you're going to have these just star players. Like, and look at the Oilers from when we were younger. Those teams, every year they thought that the next draft pick was going to be the next Wayne Gretzky. And giving a lot of them were honestly supposed to be like, Nail Yakupov was supposed to be a next coming when he came out. Taylor Hall was supposed to be a next coming, and he when he first joined the league, he was amazing. He blew up for that team. But we saw many picks, and they kept saying, and they, not that they didn't have good teams, but, and then they would build that, and they said, all right, we'll get a goalie eventually. We're getting first-round picks. We're loading up our forwards right now. We're building a superstar roster of young kids. We'll get a goalie later. And now they've just been subbing in these goalies, and Mike Smith is not cutting it.
I mean, I think, you know, the Oilers are a good example of how not to build from within, because they tried to build through the draft, but their problem was they didn't diversify their draft picks ever. They just kept drafting scoring forwards.
Yeah, like I said, their issue, it's not that the building was the issue with them. It was that they assumed that they were going to solve a problem down the line that they couldn't solve.
Well, they just didn't diversify their draft picks. Like, instead of having, like, you know, instead of drafting, like, a really good defensive defenseman high one year and then a really good goalie high one year, they were just like, oh, who's the best available scoring forward? He's my draft pick. And it's like, you can't draft 16 scoring forwards and expect the rest of the team to, like, come together.
It eventually didn't bite them in the ass because they got McDavid out of it, but they drove many of those superstars out of there. I think now Yakupov, he had a shitty attitude, whatever, we can talk about it another time, but, like, I think he could have been better than what he was. I think that they threw him they threw him to the dogs too early. Taylor Hall, they didn't stunt his career, but I think they kind of kicked him down a notch for the worse when McDavid took over and just took over his team.
I mean, Eberle essentially got driven out by Taylor Hall, and then Taylor Hall got driven out by Connor McDavid. So
yeah,
it's like,
and I honestly believe that is part of the reason. Taylor Hall was a different player before Connor McDavid joined the league.
But, I mean, that's also part of the issue is, like, that just goes to show that you can't keep drafting the same players because they're just going to keep supplanting each other. Like, if you draft a defensive defenseman in the top 10, he's not going to push your scoring winger out of your team because they're not competing for the same ice time. And, you know, it's interesting because the Oilers are just kind of an example of how not to build from within. And I'm not saying, like, you can't have major parts of your organization come from outside the organization, because there are teams who have had really big players from outside the team. I mean, when you look at the LA Kings Stanley Cup wins, I mean, Mike Richards was by way of the Philadelphia Flyers. Like, he was a big
Mike
piece.
Richards and Marian Gaborik were two of the biggest pieces on that team, and they both were brought in.
But the core three, or the core four, really, when somebody said LA Kings, you thought of
Kopitar, Dustin Brown,
Drew Doughty, and Jonathan Quick. Were organizational pieces.
Those are the four guys you said every time. When I mentioned, most people forget that Gaborik was even on that team, and he had 60 goals or whatever.
Or he didn't score 60. He scored like 30 something.
It was he had I know he had something stupid in the playoffs. He had like 20 points in the playoffs or whatever it was, though.
But so that's not to say that, like, obviously, even when you take a look at some of the teams we're talking about, like the New York Islanders, like Eberle's a big part of the team. He came outside the organization, but your core, most of the core, I don't think you can take ham scraps and make it into a core. Like, the only exception to this rule to this point, I think, has been the Vegas Golden Knights, but that's just because the nature of being an expansion team, you are given ham scraps, and you have to turn that into a team.
Look at the Rangers when they had Rick Nash. It was
most of that team. I mean, McDonough was a trade from the Canadiens, but he didn't develop in Montreal. He developed in New York. He was a New York Ranger. Like, I don't consider him from outside the organization because he didn't develop until he hit New York.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. So, time and time again, we've seen a superstar can change to a team. A team can't change to a whole group of superstars can't make a team.
I mean, Chicago Blackhawks, the big four guys you used to think about was Seabrook, Keith, Taves, Kane, and then even if you throw in Crawford, like, those guys were all from within the organization.
And even, like, Andrew Shaw.
I don't remember. I think he was a draft pick of theirs. I think so. I think he was from within. I'm not positive on him, but it's just one of those things where it's like, I think that's kind of what is dooming the Phoenix Coyotes right now, is just because, like, they're trying to build this Frankenstein's monster of pieces that aren't theirs, like Phil Kessel, you know, both Antti Ranta and Darcy Kemper came from outside the organization. That's not to say they're not playing well, because they're both playing extremely well, but, you know, Kessel, Brassard, Stepan,
goalies I think goalies can be brought in just because of the nature of their position.
Because they're different. Not a team player, quote unquote.
Yeah, exactly.
But, like, Derek Stepan, Alex Goligoski for a while was on his team, Phil Kessel, Taylor Hall last year. Like, they just keep trying to, like I said, build this Frankenstein's monster of parts, and they're not giving their own team, like, a chance to mesh. You know what I'm saying? Like, every time something doesn't work out, they're like, oh, who's the new guy on free agency? I want him. He's going to be on my team now.
That guy with the new visor, he's got the reflective one. I want him.
Yeah, so I mean they're a difficult team, and I guess we'll kind of start to wrap it up with the last team we want to talk about, which is the Dallas Stars. And I mean, is there really like anything to? I mean, there's a lot to say about this team, but obviously we have to talk about their inability to win past regulation. I mean, what was it? They have 13 overtime losses.
13 overtime losses, 6 shootout losses, or I think they're 6-2 in the shootout.
2-6, you mean?
Or yeah, 2-6. My mistake. Yeah, they're 2-6 in the shootout this year. Like, come on, guys.
I mean, you can point to some big injuries. Like, obviously, losing Tyler Seguin hurts.
Losing Radulov hurts. Khudobin being in and out on the season hurts.
He was kind of like mediocre.
He was injured. He was like he actually didn't play that bad when he went out there. He actually has a decent amount of points on the season for the games he's played, but he was hurt. You can't expect him to go out there and give 110% when he's concerned if he's going to play the next game.
You know, the reason that I don't feel bad, though, is because there's so many other teams who had big pieces. Like, the Islanders have been without Anders Lee since, like, Game 20. The Tampa Bay Lightning haven't had Kucherov at all.
Stamkos has been out for a while. They lost... Stamkos was out a couple times this season, actually, with different things.
Like, they haven't had Kucherov at all. The Blues didn't have Tarasenko at all. And granted, listen, the Blues haven't been playing great either, but they've still managed to work their way into a playoff spot. Like, injuries suck.
The Capitals were without Ovechkin and have been without him for a while. That stick flew in the air.
Like, injuries are a part of hockey, and you can point to injuries as a quote-unquote excuse, but at some point, you have to find a way to win games. Like, nobody's going to feel bad for you. Like, teams aren't taking it easy on the Lightning because, like, oh, well, they don't have Kucherov this year, so, like, maybe we won't score as many goals. Like, no, like, you have to find a way to win hockey games without your players. And, you know, I think the Stars were expecting some players to take big steps this year. Like, Heiskanen has kind of been a disappointment. Not in the defensive zone. He's been as good as ever defensively, but his offensive play definitely... They were expecting, like, 60 points out of him. He's going to get, like, 20 to 30.
It's kind of funny. Klingberg and him kind of switched roles a little bit this year, in that Klingberg took the offensive position and was on the first power play, if I'm correct, where Heiskanen was eventually dropped down to the second power play.
I mean, you know, they expected Denis Gurianov to take a step after his 20-goal rookie season, and he's only just been kind of okay, I think. I mean, they've got a really, really nice surprise in Jason Robertson, who's been absolutely
a monster,
fantastic for this club. I mean, this kid, if Kaprizov wasn't playing as well as he is, then Robertson would be the runaway Calder Trophy winner, because he has almost as many points as him. He just doesn't have as many goals. He's more of a playmaker. He's dishing the puck instead of scoring. So, I mean...
If he doesn't even get a few votes, it'll be criminal.
I just, you know, obviously the thing that hurt the Stars this year is the lack of scoring. I mean, and we knew that going into the year. We said this last year. We said, man, it would really be nice if Dallas could maybe go out and get, like, one more scoring winger, you know? And it's something that they just didn't choose to address in the offseason, questionably. So I guess my big question is, like, where does this leave them? I mean, you go from a Stanley Cup final to not even making the playoffs.
To be fair, Khudobin blew a lot of games against the Detroit Red Wings.
Yeah, I mean, they lost, and I would know because I also had Jake Ottinger, so I know that they lost way too many games against the Red Wings this year. Like,
the reason that the Red Wings didn't get to tank their season as much as they wanted to is because of the Dallas Stars.
Well, and also the Blue Jackets decided to lose to literally everybody.
Well, yeah, but like even then, the Detroit Red Wings still should have lost more. But somehow they have just. And I don't want to blame Khudobin because the defense hasn't really looked that great, honestly, out there. But that's not to say that the defense is really playing bad. They're just making mistakes that are getting capitalized on, and Khudobin isn't making the save that he needs to. So it's an unfortunate series of events, I think, the whole season for them.
So I know we were talking about this the other night, but they now have an issue in net. Because you have, if Ben Bishop is healthy next year, you're going to run into Ben Bishop, Jake Ottinger, and Anton Khudobin. So do you think maybe one of those guys gets exposed at the expansion draft in hopes that they get taken?
100%. I would think that they're, but
But we actually looked it up in the
Yeah, they can't.
I don't know how modified no trade clauses work for the expansion draft, but Bishop has a no trade clause flat, and I think Khudobin has an MNTC. So I'm not sure how those work.
Which, to be honest, I would rather them get rid of Khudobin anyway. So I'm not really that. If that is possible, I would hope that they maybe try and expose him. But
I mean, they're definitely not exposing Ottinger because you'd have to be out of your mind to do that.
no, that kid is phenomenal.
But, we say that, but there have been reports, actually, that the Florida Panthers, like we were talking about the other night, with their goalie situation, that they actually they're just going to expose Chris Streeter and just let him go.
Yeah, and wow, that's super shitty.
I mean, you're not exposing Spencer Knight, first of all.
You're not exposing any of your youth on your team. They have too many pieces to give up.
Well, I mean, like, just specifically in net, because you have to expose a certain amount of goalies. Like, you're not exposing Spencer Knight.
I'm saying,
I don't... Does Bob have a no trade clause? Let me see, let me look this up while you give your thoughts.
I don't think that they get rid of Bob, but it's...
You wouldn't get rid of Bob, because, I mean, you kind of can't. You invested this much money in him, like...
I would think it'd be very good for Dreger's career, too, because he's never going to get that front seat in Florida, and he kind of deserves a front seat after how he played the season. He's been absolutely amazing. He has, a 217 or something like that, and... He's played 17 games, I think, something like that. He's won 9.
Yeah, so Bob has a full no move clause. So if he doesn't want to go anywhere, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah. So
it's funny because like just a couple of years ago, we were saying like, oh, like a team should really start calling the Florida Panthers about Spencer Knight and seeing if they could try to like get him out of there because he's going to be locked behind Dreger and Bobrovsky. But then like
Dreger is 22 games played, 13-6 with a 217. So, and it's 9.23 save at % average, with 3 overtime losses. So, I think he's. It's one season, but he kind of maybe deserves that front place position on that team.
I mean, he deserves played well even last year too.
He deserves a bigger role at least for a team. He deserves the opportunity to be a starter, whereas on the Panthers. He's never playing to be a starter. He's always playing to be a maybe quarter season to half season goalie. Maybe playing like a third of the season.
I mean, he's 26 already, so it's about time that he gets his start, right? And it's funny because, like I said, just a couple of years ago, we were talking like, yeah, maybe they should try to move out Spencer Knight. And I still think Spencer Knight is too good to be playing behind Bobrovsky, but I mean he's only 20 years old, so did they just toss Tom Wilson? We just left the game, so like I don't know. Like let me look this up. But so
how much time is left on the period too? They might have just sent him to the locker room because he was starting some fuss. Oh no, it looks like they gave him 2-2. They might have tossed him though. Him and Booch got unsportsmanlikes. And so to break this down while Rob looks this up, Buchnevich and Tom Wilson were going into the corner. Buchnevich gave Wilson a little nuts tap, and Wilson didn't like it, so they had some words. They skated to center ice. They kind of got, like, the refs skated in between them. They were a little yelling at each other. Then Wilson skated over to the bench. He started screaming.
It says Tom Wilson got a misconduct, so I don't know if that's a game or just another 10. But...
And it looks like Keandre Miller might not be hurt. There have been 4 Rangers skate off with what looked like to be injuries throughout this game, for what it's worth.
They gave, according to Fantrax, they gave Wilson not a game, just another 10 minutes, because he has 15 minutes in PIMS right now. So.
Ooh, look at this.
Oh. Ouch. Oof. That's painful. That's never good.
That's a bad one, but it's the end of the season, so I don't really care.
So does Dallas just go into the offseason and maybe just pick up like a piece or two on the wings and just say
Dallas goes into the offseason. They take 2 weeks off. They get back in training camp, and they just see what's going on, what's vibing, who's skating, who wants it, and really just I think the worst thing they could do would be take the season and overreact.
I think so too. I think that this is. You can point to a lot of injuries and say that this is kind of an anomaly, honestly.
And you can look at the overtime games, and yeah, Kudobin didn't play that great, but he was fighting an injury the whole season, and they also all got COVID at some point. So not all, but like a bunch of them got COVID, and they were on COVID protocols for a long time, that team, which is why they're even still in the race, because they were delayed so long. So you take this season and you chalk it up, especially after how they played in that bubble.
Yeah, and the team, it's not a young team. Like guys like Ben and Radulov, like they're starting to get up there, but it's not a team that this one season was going to make or break. I mean, I think especially with Jason Robertson playing as well as he is, you can go into next year and say, all right, well, we're going to be healthy this year. Sagan should be healthy. Guryanov and Radulov, like everyone should come back healthy.
Everyone should hopefully come back healthy, and anyone who had a lingering injury should have like their surgeries or their like care done to them so they come back full. It's part of the reason why we haven't seen Stamkos in these past few games, if I'm correct.
A lot of teams are resting players.
If I'm correct, Stamkos is healed at this point. He's just sitting because, or that's from what I understand, because he's been skating every day. So I presume that he's just out because they don't want to risk it.
I mean, like the Islanders last night against the Sabres scratched Matt Barzal, like healthy scratches to give him some rest. Like Bob was scratched earlier in the week. Like he not even being the backup, like he was just totally scratched completely.
Ovechkin played like one shift the other night or whatever and just skated off.
Just to give everyone some rest. So, I mean, I think if I'm the Dallas Stars, I would definitely consider trying to get possibly a scoring winger in the offseason just to give the team a little bit of help, Maybe, and there's going to be guys available. I'm not going to say Taylor Hall because, I mean, we're going to go over this more about the, when we get into our full-on season wrap-up, which is next week, by the way, little surprise. Next week, during the COVID makeup games, is going to be our full regular season wrap-up where we talk about everything, including, like, what the season meant, what our opinions on it, but, I just think that they might want to just try to get one piece. Like, you don't even have to go get somebody like Taylor Hall who's going to cost you $8 million. I mean, you can go out and find somebody like Tyler Toffoli who's going to cost you like $4.5, $5. Just a little bit of help to kind of round out the top six.
Toffoli isn't helping out the top six. He's making the top six. So.
Well, I mean, yeah, for the Canadiens. But I'm saying, like, a player of his caliber, like, not an elite player, but, like, a guy who's reliable. You can count on him. He's going to get you 20 to 25 goals. You don't have to worry about it.
Depending on how he plays next season, we may change what we call him.
I'm just saying, like, for now. Like,
yeah. No,
like, that's been, like, the perception of him since he was in LA. Like, a reliable 20 to 25 goal scorer. And, kind of like, for a long time, a guy like, Matt Molson was for the Islanders. Like, yeah, he wasn't going to wow you, but he was going to score his 30 goals, and, like, that's kind of it. That's all you were asking out of him, so... I mean, I think the Stars should just go into the offseason, see who's available, try to get maybe a $4 million, $5 million winger, and just take the health into next year and see what happens, because it's still a good team. I still think on paper, especially with how well Jake Ottinger played this year, I think on paper this is a Stanley Cup contending team. They just kind of got... I won't say unlucky, but there was a lack of focus past regulation. It seemed like once they got past regulation, they were like, all right, 1 point, that's all we need to get, and then they couldn't close it out. So, I guess, is there anything else, any final thoughts you want to say kind of on these in-between teams that, I mean, we talked about the Calgary Flames last week, so we don't have to talk about them again. Any kind of final thoughts on these tweener teams before we kind of wrap up here?
Nah, I mean, we pretty much talked about just about everything that we had to, or that we wanted to. This is...
So, like I said, a little preview for next week. We're going to be doing our regular season wrap-up. during the week of COVID makeup games. We will be talk about everything that has to do with what happened in the regular season, kind of like last year where we said, like, how are we going to remember this season? What did we think about it? Our thoughts, our feelings. And then the week after that, I'm not sure how the NHL is going to be doing it. The week after that, there might even be playoffs started because the Canucks are supposed to play the Flames 3 times that week. But if both teams are statistically eliminated by then, they might just start the playoffs and just have those teams play it out. So I'm not sure. But next week, regular season wrap up. The week after will be our Stanley Cup either preview or predictions, depending on if the seeds are locked in by then. And yeah, just one last thing before you go. I know we talked a lot, and me specifically, you guys know, I've said a lot of really, really bad things about the Washington Capitals, and I stand by every single one. But we do want to extend our condolences to TJ Oshie, who posted that his dad passed away, I believe, yesterday or the day before. We all know the story about him and his dad. His dad, unfortunately, suffered from dementia. He had a lot of memory problems. So just want to extend our condolences and our well wishes to TJ and the entire Oshie family during this rough time. So, but other than that, I think there's nothing else to really talk about. So we're going to wrap it up here. Next week, regular season wrap up, week after Stanley Cup final preview. And yeah, so I want to thank everybody for watching, and we will see you guys again next time.